Hello, my name is Fred. I'm a Director of Developer Relations at Mindy, and today I'm going to talk about developers' documentation, which should be your secret weapon. During the talk, feel free to go on Twitter, share what I'm talking about, the good and the bad quote. I'm Hef Harper on Twitter, and I'm looking forward to have a discussion about this. On that note, today we only have 20 minutes, so that's going to be a high-level talk about developer documentation with a lot of quick tips and tricks on how to make your documentation awesome. Basically, putting your documentation to the next level to really give a great experience to people using your product or services. So let's start with a quote. Your developer's documentation is an integral part of your product. One cannot exist without the other. And I'm quoting that really interesting person called Frederick Harper. Yes, I'm quoting myself, but joke aside, let's focus on the last part. One cannot exist without the other. Obviously here, I'm exaggerating, but think about that. You may have the best product out there, the best services for a developer. If people don't know how to use it, if people don't know how to use different features, if they don't understand the product, people won't use it. They will move to a competitor, or they will use just a fraction of your application. So it's part of why your developer documentation is your secret weapon, is the tool that you're going to use to make the experience using your product even better. And it is really important to think about that, not just as an afterthought, but really thinking about that as part of your product. So some benefits of having a better documentation and really trying to target the best experience possible for developers. Obviously, it's the developer love, it's the user love. If people know how to use your product, if you have a great documentation, people will use your product. You're going to get more users. Those users which will translate in paid customers, and even paid customers can probably use even more of your product, which means that they may switch from, tier 1 pricing to tier 2 pricing within your offering. And by doing that, you may have less question to the customer support or your community manager on Twitter or different social media. And even if you get questions about things that are written in your well-written documentation, you're going to be able to just tell people, you know what? I'm sending you that link to get more information about the product, and that's going to save you some keystroke. But even without that, if you think about the personal benefit of writing and creating great documentation, first thing first is that to be able to put in text the experience and the knowledge you have about the product, it's not always easy. So that's going to make you a better communication. Actually, that's going to make you a better communicator when it comes to text-based communication. And we know that right now it's really important with more and more company going remote. We do most of the communication on Slack or by email or different text-based platforms. So that's a great skill to have, even if it's not your main job. And let's be honest, I don't know for you, but I'm a developer. I write part of the documentation, and sometimes I just forget how to do things. So it's kind of like embarrassing the number of times I go back to my own documentation to know how to do something. So it's just a benefit for me is the documentation is well written and is interesting and have all the details about how to use the product or the services. So the first thing may seem obvious, but the documentation or great documentation start with the content. But before that, if you have your developer documentation and you don't have a search bar, stop listening to my talk, go change your documentation site, add a search bar. That is the main feature that you need to have. There is nothing more frustrating than going on a developer documentation website and, maybe there's a table of content. Maybe I'm not quite sure what I'm looking for, but I know a couple of keywords that would help me to find the right page or the right section with the information I want. But if there is no way for me to search that information, it is quite annoying. So that should be one of the basic things you do. The second thing, I firmly believe that the devil is in the details when it comes to documentation. I know that for more and many tasks, we're saying hey, maybe doing the last 20% doesn't make sense in terms of the return on investment we're going to get on our project. But for documentation, every little details is important, from how you write things, for how you define things, from also the structure of your documentation. So the structure is really important. There's nothing more annoying than going to a documentation site and it's really hard to find the information, even if you know what you're looking for. So think about organizing your documentation in different section, in maybe sometimes in little part of information that can be a product or that can be a tutorial put together. So let me show you one example, what we've done at Mindy. If you look at the homepage of our documentation, if you look at the left, there is the first section, it's get started. And for us, this is the part where you never use Mindy, you have no idea what that is. You're going to check the documentation, you're going to understand, we're going to explain to you really high level what we do, why it's beneficial for you to use the platform. And we're going to take the user by the end to set up their account and try to do their first API call. So it's really a step-by-step tutorial. But the thing is that you can skip that section if you're already a user and if you already know how to use the platform. Next is the section where it's usually some of the questions we get from users, how to manage their account, how to manage the organization, what's the information about the billing, and how can I change the tier of the services that we are offering. So we put that right at the top, because those are some of the questions that we receive the most from our users. After that, we decided to promote a little more SDK. So right now we only have Python and Node.js, but we're working to get multiple other SDK in a couple of days, but it's not the point of the presentation. My point is that we really want our users and customers to use the SDK because first, it's a tool that gave them some post-processing, and it's a tool that we know that we created. So it's easier for us to help our users when they have any issues. So we're promoting that. So it's why it's in the top, even before we define how to use the REST API if you want to use it by yourself manually, or you want to do some connection or call to the API in your terminal. And after, we have a long list of other stuff because we have multiple features, we have different other tools, external tools that you can use to make your life easier. But you see, this is a structure that is interesting because the first part is really about helping the user going from A to Z so they can test the platform really quickly. And they may not do everything they want to do, but at least they know it's working. And they know that now they can go to the next step and try to do more advanced stuff. And we focus on the things we have the most question. And after that, we focus on the things we really want to promote, if we really want the user to start using because it's for their benefit. And to be honest, that's going to make your life easier. So that is one way to structure your documentation. Small section with the most important information first. This is the best picture I was able to find with the right copyright, but I would say when you write your documentation, think about Games of Thrones, and especially think about You Know Nothing, Jon Snow. So keep that in mind when you write your documentation. Not that the people that will read your documentation are stupid people. Most of them are not. Think really about them as they know nothing about your product or services. Even if they're a developer, they may not have experience with the technology you're using. Or even if you do code demo, they may not know how to use a specific framework. So try to put as much details as possible. Try to put some link to external information for technology that is not your technology, but people still should have some basic knowledge, because that's going to be beneficial for people that exactly know nothing about what you're talking about, but still want to use or still need to use your service. But for people that have more experience, for the expert in the room, they can just skim through the content and go to the specific section that makes sense. And they may not have to read all the text that they do not have to read all the text that accompany that is with the different information that you're promoting in the, let's say, the screenshot. Speaking about screenshot, that is often an afterthought. You really need to take the time to do beautiful screenshot. And it may seem simple, but there is little tricks that really makes your experience with your developer documentation a little bit better. So first, take high quality screenshot. It really makes a difference. Instead of having pixelated screenshot, it really gave a professional look to your documentation. But it's more than that. There are tools out there that help you to take even better screenshots with little things that seem subtle, but that really change the experience. So as an example, I'm on that page on my platform, and I need to explain to the user how to create a new API keys so they're going to be able to call the API when not using the web platform. So now, I don't want to show the token to people because obviously I could delete the token after I did my screenshot for the documentation. But trust me, I can't afford those kind of things most of the time. So if I want to be a little more secure, I'm going to try to hide the token that I just created, the key that I just created. And, most people will put a black bar on it. But that thing is that when I look at that page, at that screenshot, my eyes goes on that bar. And actually, this is not the main point that I try to focus on with that screenshot. So use a tool that will help you to hide the information in a more sexy way, in a nicer way. So, if you look at that page, at that screenshot compared to the other one, it's a little bit nicer. And my focus doesn't go automatically on the scrambled information on the screenshot. Second thing I want to do now, okay, I hid the API key, but because that page that I'm writing right now is about creating a new API key, I really want people to focus on the blue button that is on the bottom right of the screen. And I want people to, hey, yeah, this is where you need to click to create a new API key. Most people will do a kind of like a red rectangle around it, which is nice. Like now I focus on the button, but it kind of clashed with the rest of the screenshot. It's really not part of the UI. It's not as nice, let's say, as the next one, where I use a tool that gave me the opportunity to darken a little bit or grayed out a little bit the rest of the interface. So it's still visible, but now the thing that really take my focus, my eyes goes directly to the button, which is what I want to focus on for that screenshot part of my documentation. But even better, what I could do, I don't need the rest of all the interface. I really need to focus on the section where it's about creating the new API. So why not crop my screenshot and just take a screenshot of the sections that I want to highlight? So obviously, screenshot, as they are a great addition, especially because most people are visual. Be sure that at least when you start to have screenshot, that you have all the text-based information ready. Because for some people that are visual impaired, the screenshot won't mean something to them. So first, you should probably have some label information, some area label, or help text, so you explain a little bit what the screenshot had. But think about the screenshot as an addition for people that have visual capability. Everything should be already written down text-based, because that is the form that everybody can access. Even people that are visual impaired or that have visual issues can use a screen reader. And obviously the image, they cannot read the image. So having everything text-based is going to be probably the best course of action. To do that, I use a tool. It's on Mac. I get no money by promoting that application. It's a paid application, but I really love it. I try so many, and this one is really the best, the one I can recommend. The other thing is that I cannot really recommend other tools on other platform. I don't feel confident to do that because I did not use them. But there is a lot of tools out there to do screenshot that give you those additional function that are more than just taking the screenshot, the things that I've shown you with my example. So try to find the right tool that makes sense for you, for your platform, that give you those little features that really give you a professional look when you take those screenshots. So it's not just about taking the screenshot, it's what you do with the screenshot after to be sure that the user will get the right information. One of the last things you need to do when you create the content of your documentation is to review your content. You need to review your content. Most people write it down once, publish, and you're like, I'm done. You should review your content. You should take a break, maybe review the content you wrote today, tomorrow, in 2 days, or even better, ask a third party like someone else who didn't wrote the documentation and who may know enough about the product that they know if you wrote something that makes sense or no to review your content. You would be surprised how many typos we do, how many explanations that were super clear in our head, but once we put it in words, may not make that more sense, or it's clear to us, but may not be clear to someone else. And the thing is that if it's not clear to one other person, it probably means that it's not clear for other person too. So you're going to need to like change a little bit the details, change the formulation of your word to make it clearer for many more people and not just yourself. The other thing, when you review your documentation, think about the code. And when you review the code, just don't read the code and like, hey, syntax-wise, it looks nice. No, you know what? What you do, copy and paste the code example you have in your code, in your documentation, in your IDE. Don't write it down. Copy and paste so you ensure that it's going to be the same code that you have in your documentation, and try to run the application or try to run the example that you have right now. So by doing that, you're going to ensure that the code is working well because you basically copy and paste the code, which is, let's be honest, what most developer will do. We're always a little bit lazy, and especially when you want to try an application or a service for the first time, you will need to, most of the time, copy and paste the code just to be sure, like, hey, is this working? Can I do like just maybe a hello world type of example, but can I do it? And most of the time I do this myself. I'm just going to copy and code the code and copy and paste the code and just try to see if I can do just the minimum I need with the service. So after that, I can start to read a little more about the documentation and do more advanced stuff. So when it comes to writing content, there is one link to rule them all. One resources that you should keep in mind, it's Write the Docs. Yes, it's a conference, but they have a Slack community that is super welcoming. Even if you're not a technical writer, they have a lot of resources on their website, but also they have a GitHub repo with a lot more resources for technical writers, for people writing documentation, for writing blog, basically anything that needs writing skills toward developer, and even I think toward non-technical audience. It's one of the best resources out there and really a great community. Some example of really good documentation I found out there. Stripe is always one of the best examples. They did a really good job with their API documentation. There's also Twilio. Twilio does a lot of great stuff with anything developer related. Also GitHub. And GitHub is also a really great documentation. They have a lot of information, but the thing is that you can always find the information that makes sense for you. And obviously, as I said, they have a search bar. So if you don't find it in a table of content, it's quite easy to find the information you're looking for. And lastly, I would be damned if I did not say that our documentation is pretty nice at MindD. The only thing, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but we're actually reviewing the screenshot. So it's a case for the screenshot of do what I say, not do what I do. But actually, we're doing it right now. We're reviewing the screenshot. So the screenshot's going to be a little bit better. But overall, the organization, how we find the things are, I think, well done. But little secret, if I want to be transparent, my team is responsible for the documentation. So you do what you want with that information. The second part, which is often taken as a second thought or not as important, is the container. Because now you work on the content, you have content to write, you know what you're going to talk about, you have like a pretty good idea how to write great documentation. But you need a container, you need a way to give access to that documentation. The first thing you need to think about with documentation or the framework or whatever you're going to use to show your documentation to developer is the fact that it should be fast. It should be quick. People don't like to wait. We're used to have like a really fast web right now. It's way faster than it used to when I started in tech. We have better internet connection, most of us, not everybody. So by making it fast, people don't wait for your documentation. They don't get bored. that give them a better experience. But on top of that, if you make a website for your documentation and you use a framework that deliver the information quickly, but also in a proper, smaller size and adapted for different internet speed, you're gonna give also a better experience for people that don't have a fast internet connection. So we're lucky in North America, many places in Europe, but even in those places where we have like really fast internet connection, if you're out of the city, sometimes it's not that fast. So let's think about those users too. I can't believe I have to say that in 2022. I still have to say it. Make your documentation site responsive, because people will check your documentation, not just on computer. They will check your documentation page on their phone, on their iPad. And there isn't people that code on their iPad or on their phone. I'm not quite sure how it works, but because I really need my big monitor on my home desk. But at the end of the day, people do it. So you want to serve those customers too, or those potential users. You need to think about the documentation that's going to be easy to maintain and easy to use for the user. Like if it's easier to find the menu or easier to find the table of content. But at the same time, when you think about developer documentation, the goal is not to maintain the platform where you're going to have your documentation. You need to focus on the documentation itself, on the content. So try to find a platform that's going to make your life easier. Try to find a platform that you don't have to code yourself. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel. And I know developers, we want to create things, we want to use new technology, we want to try stuff. But with that specific use case for documentation, you don't want to do that. Even if you want to, you should not do that, because you really need to find something that's going to be maintainable, that's going to be easy to update, and that's going to be easy to customize to your need. Because the focus now is not to take energy on the container, it's to put your energy on the content, the information that you're going to have on your documentation. So some example of the container / platform you can use to do that. Some of the most popular one is readme.com. So it's a software as a service platform. You don't host anything. It's really good for documentation that you kind of like write once and you don't have to modify a lot, or you don't have to do big modification, or you don't manage the documentation. There's no multiple people managing the documentation. If there's too many people, too many big changes, README kind of like get confused. But I know that they're working to improve that part and have a better process for people that do a lot of modification with the documentation. If you want to host your own and you want to use open source, one of the most popular platforms out there is Docusaurus. So it's open source. It was a project started by Facebook. I'm not sure if it's still maintained by them, but it's really one of the most popular platforms. It's easily customizable. And again, it's open source, so you have access to the source. The only thing is that you need to host your documentation yourself. But sometimes it is what you want to do. Again, think about the fact that it should still be easy to maintain that platform. Another one that is quite popular is Read the Docs. The popularity comes because, as far as I know, they use Sphinx, which is the framework for documentation used by Pythonista, people doing Python, but a lot of people, even if they don't code in Python, even if their project is not in Python, they use Read the Doc. Also because the technology to write with that documentation is RST. And most of other platform, most of the time, going to have like Markdown support, which is quite often easier to understand, especially if you have non-technical people that will participate in improving or writing part of the documentation. But in the end, seriously, any static site generator, any platform, CMS like WordPress, anything that give you the opportunity to show text-based content with images will make sense. Just keep in mind that it needs to be everything I said before, like easily manageable, that it's easy for the people that will have to write the documentation to use it, because you may not be, if you're a developer and you're responsible for the documentation, you may be responsible for the overall platform, but you may not be the one who always write the content. Maybe you're going to have like a PM that may not be as technical and will have to write documentation. So maybe using Git to manage the file versioning of your documentation, or putting your documentation on GitHub.io may not be the best scenario for your specific use case. So in the end, in the time we have, let's keep in mind that you're going to make mistakes. Your documentation won't be perfect. Actually, developer documentation is always a work in progress. There is always something that we can do a little bit better. There is always something that we can improve. But the goal is to bring your documentation to a stage where that's going to be good enough. You're going to have like that great quality, and a quality that will differentiate yourself from competitor, quality that will bring more people in your yard, that will bring more paid users, because that really can be your secret weapon. That really can be your superpower. You need a great developer documentation to put your product out front, to be sure that people will have a pleasant experience using your service. And if you want to have one last tip, and if you need to remember one only tip for that conference, I would say hire someone whose the main job is going to be to manage your documentation. Hire a technical writer. That person has a mastery in English, know how to use Word, know how to communicate by text. This is their job. And even if they don't have full-time work to do on the documentation, they can write blog posts, they can write tutorials, they can basically help you with anything text-based. And it is a cost, but for me, it's more like an investment than a cost, because it's really their own job to do that, and they're usually good at it. So on that note, this is everything I had to share in that 20 minutes. My name is Frédéric Harper. Feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions, something was not clear. If you want to discuss about documentation, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. This is basically where I spend way too much time, but also you can reach out to me by email at fred@mindy.com. And you can even schedule a coffee chat with me, 30-minute talks on Zoom. Go on fred.dev/coffee. I'm going to be more than happy to talk to you about improving your developer documentation, giving you suggestion or advice to just give a better experience to any developer. So on that note, have a good rest of the day.